The Life of Zorn v.0.0.4. A journey through shadows and light. Zorn's life has been one of profound contrasts, a journey through shadows and light, where moments of hope have flickered in the darkness, only to be dimmed by the harsh realities of addiction, loss, and the relentless struggle for survival. Yet, through it all, Zorn's story is also one of resilience, of a heart that, despite being battered by life's storms, continues to beat with a desire for meaning, connection, and redemption. From his earliest memories, Zorn felt like he was separated from the rest of the world by an invisible barrier. Social interactions, the threads that wove others' lives together, were like a maze without an exit for him, confusing and often unreachable. It was as if everyone else had been handed a map, a guidebook to life, while he was left to wander alone, struggling to make sense of a world that often felt alien. There's a memory that lingers, a night when Zorn, as a young boy, desperately wanted to play on the swing set outside, but the words to describe it escaped him. And when he finally managed to ask his mother, the answer was a simple no, because it's dark. To Zorn, this wasn't just a refusal, it was another layer of that invisible barrier, keeping him from the world's simple joys. The darkness outside mirrored the darkness within, a sense of being kept from something beautiful and joyful that everyone else seemed to access with ease. As he grew older, this sense of alienation only deepened. By the time he reached 7th grade, Zorn found solace in marijuana. The drug wasn't just a substance, it was an escape, a way to temporarily dissolve that barrier and feel connected, if only fleetingly, to a world that often felt cold and unkind. Marijuana offered warmth in a world where he often felt isolated, and though it was illegal, the risk seemed worth the comfort it provided. Life, as it often does, delivered its harshest blow when Zorn was least prepared for it. His mother, the lighthouse guiding him through the stormy seas of his life, was diagnosed with cancer. She had always been the one constant in his life, the one person who, despite everything, was there for him. And now, that light was flickering, threatening to go out forever. The fear of losing her wasn't just about losing a mother, it was about losing the one person who anchored Zorn to the world. As her illness progressed, Zorn's reality began to unravel. The world he had known, unstable as it was, started to collapse, and with it, his sense of self began to disintegrate. During this turbulent time, after his mother's diagnosis but before his steep decline into addiction, Zorn met Laura. She came into his life like a breath of fresh air, bringing with her a sense of understanding and compassion that Zorn had rarely experienced. Laura saw him not as a broken person, but as someone full of potential, someone worth caring about. From the very beginning, Laura and Zorn shared a deep connection. She taught him so much about life, about himself, and about what it meant to truly care for someone. In a time when Zorn's world was growing darker, Laura was a light, one that guided him through some of the most confusing and painful moments of his life. She was there as he grappled with his mother's illness, offering support and understanding when he needed it most. Laura wasn't just a romantic partner, she was a teacher, a confidant, and a source of strength. She showed Zorn that there was more to life than the pain he was feeling, that there were people in the world who could see him for who he really was. Her presence in his life was like a lifeline, holding him above water even as the waves of his mother's illness threatened to pull him under. But even with Laura by his side, the shadows were never far away. As his mother's condition worsened, Zorn's internal struggles intensified. It was during this time, a year or two after his mother's diagnosis, that Zorn first attempted to extinguish his own light. By then, he had been introduced to crack cocaine, a substance that felt like pouring gasoline on the fire that was already raging within him. The drugs provided a quick and powerful escape from the overwhelming fear and sadness that had become his constant companions. Laura saw this descent firsthand. She watched as Zorn, the man she cared so deeply for, began to slip away, consumed by a darkness she couldn't fully understand or combat. Eventually, Zorn's addiction led to his arrest. He spent roughly 45 days in county jail, a time that forced him to reflect on the path he had taken. But in the midst of this darkness, there was a sliver of hope. Laura, along with Zorn's mother, advocated for him to receive treatment instead of jail time. This was Zorn's chance, a fragile, flickering opportunity to turn his life around. With their support, Zorn was mandated to treatment and placed on a year of probation. For a while, it seemed as though Zorn might finally be on the path to recovery. He entered treatment, carrying the weight of his past but with a faint glimmer of hope that perhaps, this time, things could be different. But the universe had one more devastating blow to deliver. 7 months into his treatment, Zorn's mother passed away. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that crashed over him, pulling him deeper into despair. The pain of losing the one person who had been his constant throughout life was too much to bear. In his anguish, Zorn attempted to take his own life again. This time, the consequences were severe. He was kicked out of the treatment program. After being kicked out of treatment, Zorn was placed in a group home, a structured environment meant to help him transition back into society. But the rules and restrictions felt suffocating, a constant reminder of everything he had lost and everything he was still fighting against. Feeling more lost than ever, Zorn ran away from the group home, plunging himself into a new kind of darkness, homelessness. As Zorn descended back into self-destruction, the chaos and pain in his life became unbearable for both him and Laura. Despite her deep love and concern, Laura faced the heart-wrenching realization that she had to leave. It wasn't that she stopped caring, it was that she cared too much. She knew that her presence could no longer help him, and that, for both their sakes, she had to step away. With nowhere else to turn, Zorn found himself on the streets of Buffalo. For the next year and a half, he was homeless, drifting through the city with no clear direction or purpose. The winter months were especially brutal, with temperatures that could freeze a man to death if he wasn't careful. Zorn barely survived those harsh months, sleeping in doorways, under park benches, and covering himself with cardboard boxes in a desperate attempt to keep warm. Some nights, the cold seeped so deeply into his bones that he wondered if he would wake up in the morning. Occasionally, Zorn found refuge in homeless shelters, but even there, he felt out of place, as though he were drifting further from any sense of belonging or purpose. He was a shadow of the person he had once been, lost in a world that seemed determined to forget him. But even in those darkest days, there were moments of kindness, small acts that kept him alive. Soup kitchens, the city mission, and the compassion of strangers who offered a hot meal or a warm place to stay for the night were lifelines in a world that seemed determined to swallow him whole. Zorn knows that without these places and the people who ran them, he would have died, cold, alone, and forgotten. After surviving the brutal winter on the streets, Zorn managed to pull himself out of the darkness, entering a period of clean time that spanned several years. It was during this time in 2013 that Zorn met a woman who would become his wife. She was a source of stability and comfort, and together they began to build a life that, for a time, felt like a refuge from the storm that had characterized Zorn's earlier years. In 2017, Zorn and his wife married, marking a new chapter in his life. The years that followed were a mix of happiness and struggle. While Zorn was clean, the shadows of his past never fully disappeared. The pain, the loss, the unresolved grief, all of it lingered just beneath the surface. By 2020, the cracks in Zorn's life had begun to widen. The weight of unresolved pain and the relentless pressure of life's challenges began to take their toll. Despite years of clean time, the darkness that Zorn had fought so hard to keep at bay started to creep back into his life. The strain of these internal battles, coupled with the pressures of his marriage, led to a breaking point. In 2020, Zorn and his wife divorced, a painful ending to a chapter that had once seemed full of promise. The divorce was a devastating blow, one that reopened old wounds and reignited the struggles that Zorn had worked so hard to overcome. In the aftermath, the familiar pull of addiction returned, stronger than ever. Zorn found himself slipping back into the destructive patterns that had once nearly destroyed him. The descent was rapid and unforgiving, and before long he was once again caught in the grip of his addiction. Amidst this turmoil, there was a glimmer of something familiar and comforting. Laura. After years apart, Zorn and Laura reconnected in 2020. Their bond, though tested by time and distance, remained strong. They found solace in each other, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though this reconnection might be the anchor Zorn needed to stabilize his life. But the pull of addiction and the weight of mental health struggles were not easily cast aside. Despite their deep connection and the love they still shared, the challenges that Zorn faced proved overwhelming. The pain and turmoil that had driven them apart once before returned. And Laura, recognizing that she could not save him from his demons, had to make the heart-wrenching decision to leave once again. She knew that staying could no longer help him, and that, for both their sakes, she had to step away, hoping that by doing so, Zorn might find the strength to save himself. In the wake of Laura's departure, Zorn was left to confront the full force of his addiction and the mental health struggles that had plagued him for so long. The years that followed were marked by repeated attempts to reclaim his life, attempts that were met with varying degrees of success and failure. In 2023, recognizing that he could no longer continue down the path he was on, Zorn made the difficult decision to put himself back into treatment. The journey was far from straightforward. Each step forward seemed to be met with another setback, each attempt at recovery followed by another relapse. The process was grueling, testing Zorn's resolve in ways he hadn't anticipated. But even in the face of these challenges, there was a part of him that refused to give up. It wasn't a single moment that marked the turning point for Zorn, but rather a series of small, hard-earned victories. Each time he fell, he found the strength to stand back up, each failure teaching him something new about himself and his journey. The repeated trips back to treatment, the honest confrontations with his own demons, and the slow rebuilding of his life, these were the building blocks of his recovery. Now, Zorn stands on more solid ground than he has in years. He has fought his way back from the brink, emerging from the darkness with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of himself. The road ahead is still uncertain, but it's one he's prepared to walk with the knowledge and resilience he has gained along the way. The power of connection, healing through relationships. As Zorn worked to rebuild his life, he began to understand the profound importance of connection, something that had often eluded him in his earlier years. Through the hardships he had faced, Zorn came to see that it was the connections he made with others that provided the foundation for his healing, whether it was the unwavering love of Laura, the enduring care of his mother, or the small, everyday acts of kindness from strangers. These connections were what kept him grounded when everything else seemed to fall apart. Zorn also realized that he didn't have to go through life alone. The walls he had built around himself, the barriers that had kept him isolated from others, were not impenetrable. Slowly, he began to let people in, to allow himself to be vulnerable, to share his story and his struggles with those who cared about him. In doing so, he discovered a community of people who understood, who had faced their own demons, and who were willing to support him as he continued on his journey. A new philosophy, embracing resilience and compassion. The experiences Zorn has lived through have shaped a new philosophy in him, one grounded in resilience and compassion. He's come to understand that resilience is not about never falling down. It's about getting back up, time and time again, no matter how many times life knocks you down. It's about recognizing your own strength, even when you feel weak, and finding the courage to keep going, even when the path ahead is uncertain. Compassion has also become a guiding principle in Zorn's life. Compassion for others, but also for himself. He's learned that kindness is a powerful force for healing, that understanding and empathy can bridge the gaps between people, and that everyone is fighting their own battles, often unseen. By extending compassion to others, Zorn has found that he's also been able to heal some of the wounds within himself, looking to the future, hope, and possibility. Today, Zorn stands at a crossroads. The road behind him is long and filled with challenges, but it's also a testament to his strength and determination. The road ahead is still uncertain, but it's also full of possibilities. Zorn is filled with a renewed sense of hope. Hope for the future, hope for continued healing, and hope that he can use his experiences to make a difference in the lives of others. Zorn dreams of building a life that's meaningful, not just for himself, but for those around him. He wants to continue growing, learning, and evolving, to become the best version of himself that he can be. He envisions a future where he can use his knowledge, his compassion, and his resilience to help others who are struggling, to show them that there is always a way forward, even when the path seems darkest. He knows that the journey won't be easy, but he's ready to face whatever comes next with the same determination that has brought him this far. And he knows that, no matter what, he won't be walking that path alone. The light might flicker, but it's never truly gone. I'm still here, and as long as I am, there's always hope. Zorn.